Welcome to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm Greg Drevenstedt, Editor-in-Chief at Rider Magazine. Our guests on episode 58 are Ina Thorn and Tim James. Ina is Executive Director of Backcountry Discovery Routes, and Tim is BDR's Board President. Backcountry Discovery Routes is a non-profit organization that creates off-highway routes for dual sport and adventure motorcycle travel. BDR has introduced a new route with free GPS tracks nearly every year since 2010. When we last spoke to Ina and Tim on episode 33, the Wyoming BDR had just been released. In 2023, the Oregon BDR was released, making it the 12th full route, and each one can be completed in about a week. Backcountry Discovery Routes has also released shorter BDR-X routes that are loops that can be done in 2 to 3 days. Through the tireless work of its staff and many volunteers, Backcountry Discovery Routes maintains existing routes and continues developing new ones. Future BDRs will include Southern California, Montana, and the Southeast. The nonprofit organization provides information, rider education, and safety campaigns to promote responsible motorcycle travel in the backcountry. I encourage listeners to visit ridebdr.com to learn more about the routes and support this fantastic organization. You can also learn about upcoming film premieres for the Oregon BDR documentary, BDR's annual fundraising ride, benefits of becoming a member, and much more. If you've ridden a backcountry discovery route, you know what an amazing experience it is. If you haven't, you should pick a route and start planning a trip. You can join route-specific Facebook groups, and you can get GPS tracks and other planning information such as waterproof Butler maps on the ridebdr.com website. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. Ina and Tim, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. We spoke, it was actually episode 33, and we're 57 or whatever this number is, 58. I'm losing track, but we spoke last year about the backcountry discovery routes a little bit. And at the time, your newest route was the Wyoming BDR. And from what I understand, you guys, at this point, you now have 12 full routes that you've developed and released. And you've one of those includes Oregon, which is your newest full BDR route. Is that correct?
100% correct. Yes, that's our brand new route that is just launching as we speak.
Okay. So, before we get into talking about Oregon, which of the BDRs, that's actually the only BDR I've ridden myself, but I actually rode the sort of pre-backcountry discovery routes, the one that was developed by the Oregon Off-Highway Vehicle Association. So I'd like to sort of find out a little bit about how your route differs and so forth. But let's sort of step back for people that aren't quite familiar with what backcountry discovery routes are. Tell us a little bit about your program.
Yeah, so Backcountry Discovery Routes, we're a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to creating and preserving adventure riding opportunities for the ADV community. Like you said, we have now 12 routes in the BDR system, 12 main routes. But last year, we also launched a new concept, which is the BDR-X routes, which are shorter loops that can be done in 2 to 3 years. But our mission is to create these routes to inspire the adventure community to discover the backcountry of the United States by motorcycle. We also advocate for, with the voice of adventure motorcyclists in the community and kind of a liaison between the land managers and the community. So if there are any road closures or changes in the routes, we're there in a timely manner to let the community know that the route has changed, and they can come and download new tracks or updated tracks on the website. And then we also educate riders about safe travel on public lands, promoting safety. We're sharing knowledge and informing community about the right way of traveling in the backcountry. And then finally, our routes bring sustainable economic impact to rural communities, which has really been an incredible kind of feat for our organization. We have just completed our second economic impact study, and the results will be coming out in spring. But what we found that in 2021, the 12 routes that were in existence at the time generated over $55 million in economic stimulus in these rural communities. So that's kind of it in the nutshell. We do a lot for the community and for these the riding community, but also for the communities that we travel through.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say that last point about the economic impact, I don't think was something that the founders of the organization saw right away. And it's something that came out, as BDR developed. And when we saw how we were affecting these small communities, we really leaned in and made it a main part of our mission is to feed these small communities with adventure riders who want to spend their money, right? And help, and help these communities grow and give back. And they, in turn, they turn around and be our advocates for BDR because they see it as a source of sustainable income for them. So we work hand in hand with these communities.
So to sort of take a deeper dive into, let's say a specific route, most of your routes are at this point, they're mostly Western states, and they're basically each route is sort of allocated to, like, there's an Arizona route, there's a New Mexico route, there's a Colorado route, for example. I know California is such a long state that at this point you've got a Southern California route and a Northern California route is in development. But being a backcountry discovery route, these routes are mostly through public lands. They're mostly in very remote areas. That's why they're called backcountry. But the way that you've designed the routes, they connect areas where you can get fuel, where you can get, there may be, buy food, there may be some motels or something. So when you're talking about the economic impact, it's more about the point-to-point places where the riders can go into these communities, refuel, resupply. Is that what you're talking about?
That's 100% correct, right? And like I said, I don't think the founders saw that coming, but it came out pretty quickly, and we decided, as I mentioned, lean into that. And we're also feeding the industry in a way, because that some of that money that's being spent, we're finding is spent specifically to ride a BDR. So in other words, riders are preparing just to do BDRs. They're buying motorcycles, they're buying accessories, they're buying luggage, they're getting trained, all these ancillary kind of services and products to enable them to do a BDR. That money's being spent as well. So in essence, we're helping the whole segment, the adventure market segment.
Right. Well, the Motorcycle Industry Council not too long ago released its final sales figures for the 2022 calendar year. And overall, the industry has sort of contracted in terms of unit sales, and most of the segments within the motorcycle industry had contracted. But the adventure and dual sport segment it's the bright spot. It has been for over a decade. It shows year after year there's consistent growth in the sales of adventure and dual sport motorcycles. So those are the kinds of bikes that are perfect for riding a BDR. I mean, so it can be everything from a KLR 650, KTM 500 EXC sort of dual sport on that end, all the way up to BMW R1250 GSs and GS Adventures and KTM 1290 Super Adventures and so forth. So the full range are the sorts of bikes that people are riding on these BDR routes. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And now you can even ride an electric bike like a Zero DSRX on the BDR.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we always say BDRs can be done on any budget and on any bike. It just depends on the rider and what you're looking for in your experience, what you can afford, what your resources are. And so we just make it easy for people to go and have these incredible adventures that are not somewhere in Africa or in South America, but right here in the backyard. And it's really like what BDR brings, it's managed travel on public lands. And these routes are evergreen and they're supported. So we're not just creating a new route a year. Our volunteers are actively managing these routes. We are, learning from the community or from the land managers if there are any closures or something that needs to be updated or changed. And that's a lot of work. And that's where, when people support and donate to the BDR, that's where the money goes, is for us to be able to not just create the routes, but also, keep them evergreen.
Yeah. That's right. And Greg, back to your point, I think you mentioned that you rode the Oregon BDR, the original Oregon Backcountry Discovery Route. So there's a case where that organization didn't have the resources that we have to continuing, like, monitoring the route, updating the route, informing the public of what's going on, and supporting it. So it was kind of a delicate situation for us to do a BDR over an existing BDR, but there is no overlap. It's an entirely new route. I think the public was ready for it because it wasn't getting the attention it probably needed, the original one. There was a lot of, from what I understand, dead ends and things that just it wasn't as fluid as our routes. So, and all due respect to the organization that did it, I think it's fantastic and was part of the inspiration for our organization. So, but that's what we have to give back, is that full support of the routes.
Well, unfortunately, I haven't had an opportunity to do one of your routes yet. I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the planning resources, but I can just speak to my experience. the Oregon Off-Highway Vehicle Association that had developed the original backcountry discovery route in Oregon. And I know there were several different routes within the state. And the one that I selected, it was mainly because it was the closest one. I live in Southern California, and me and two buddies basically rode up to the Oregon border in northeastern California. And it was the route that basically went through eastern Oregon all the way up to Walla Walla, Washington. And we went through the HVA and bought their paper maps, which were, we basically had to put them in these, sort of almost like binders that we took with us. Being able to buy or get a GPS track, well, they were from different sources and so forth. And like you said, the route was developed, but it just was not maintained in an ongoing way. And so, and since it went through some area where there was grazing lands and so forth, there were gates and some places we had to route around, and there was quite a bit of sort of, figuring things out on the trail. So, yeah, I can certainly see the value of what the Backcountry Discovery Routes organization does, where you not only develop the route, but you're as Ina said, you're keeping it evergreen. You want to continue to maintain it. I'm sure if there's some sort of closure, if there were some sort of landslide and you had to change the route, or if there's other things like that, that is an ongoing part of keeping it a living route, I guess would be a way to describe it. So, yeah.
That's correct.
So, so again, with your BDR routes, the 12 main routes, most of these are really designed to be completed within about a week's time. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
And most run from sort of south to north. You're running basically from the southern border to the northern border of a state, more or less. Like I said, I know with California, it's such a long state that right now there's a Southern California route, and then there'll be a Northern California route developed. But with, for example, Arizona, and north of Arizona is Utah, and then north of Utah is Idaho. So you've got routes in those three states. Could you conceivably connect those three routes more or less and basically go almost like from the Mexican border all the way to the Canadian border?
That's the concept. And if you look at our homepage on our website and you start to see the master plan of, vertical stripes across the United States, we've got, as you mentioned, the Northern California route it's in development right now. Once we have that final piece of that puzzle, you'll be able to go from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. Yeah, It's pretty amazing. And people and a lot of riders like to do that. They want that grand adventure, not just one BDR. So.
Well, that's great. I mean, because again, it is a matter of time and resources. Where we actually ran a story in the magazine in our January issue, and a fella who lives in Minnesota, he and a friend of his, they went to Arizona. They rented a couple of bikes, and they didn't do the entire Arizona and Utah BDR. They did pieces of it because they kind of were doing this buddy trip. They wanted to explore some places. So that's also something somebody could conceivably do. If they don't have a full week, they could still do a section of a BDR. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. And we even have we've developed a couple of different ways of doing shorter BDRs. Ina mentioned the BDRX concept, and we also have we've published a bunch of maps that are what we call bite-sized BDRs, that are sections of different BDRs that are looped by, then sometimes it's dirt and sometimes it's pavement that just loops you back to the beginning. It's all epic, but we create these little 2 or 3 day adventures, and those are available on the website, as well as the BDRX routes.
Yeah, but to your point, what we publish is just a starting point for people, an idea. You can write the whole route, you can write 2 routes, or you can just write sections of it. And a lot of people do come back and write them sections at a time. So it's just how much time you have to devote to it. And again, it's just a starting point. The adventure is yours to create. Right.
I mean, we have riders who have now done all 10 BDRs in a year.
Wow.
Right? That's pretty amazing.
That's impressive.
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I know at least and I'm more familiar with my home state of California, is that, for example, national forest roads, that some of them are gated, that we've had a lot of heavy rains lately. We've had a lot of snow. There can be landslides. And so anybody who wants to go out adventure riding, even just planning a route is very time consuming, so that you've done basically a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of finding out what is an available route. If I understand things correctly, even if there's some technical sections, you often have some alternate routes that may route around it. If you're like, hey, I'm on a big bike, it's got a lot of luggage on it, my skill set is more intermediate, I don't really want to go some really technical route, so you can route around. So you really helped provide people with a resource that they don't have to do all that planning themselves.
Yeah, that's correct.
So,
Yeah.
so what sort of resources, again, you're a nonprofit organization, you have a website. What sort of things, if somebody was going to plan to do a BDR, what would they get from your website or from your organization? What do you provide?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's free GPS tracks for all of these routes. So you go on ridebdr.com, you can download all of our tracks for free. And you can navigate with the navigational app like Gaia or Rever, or put it into your GPS unit and navigate that way. We also partner with Butler Motorcycle Maps to create a professional, waterproof, everlasting map that you would want to buy for sure as a supplemental informational resource. You can't really navigate turn by turn from the map, but it'll give you a lot of additional information as you're traveling. We have a very robust resources for each route on the website. There's an interactive map, so you can zoom in and see the typography of the route. We have a FAQ section where we try to answer as many questions as riders perceivably might have. We've got a listing of lodging, food, gas stations on the route. There's also a dedicated Facebook group page for all of the routes. So we've got now 12 Facebook group pages that we're managing. And that's where riders can go and join the group, become a member, ask any questions related to the route. People post ride reports and the most up-to-date information on the route. So that's a great resource as well. And then, of course, we have the feature-length documentary film that we produce, which is kind of the first expedition of all of us on that route, where we're riding with variety of skill levels, different bikes. So we're kind of testing the ground to see how is it doable. And that's where we really can hone in, is this an advanced route and we need an easier alternate around it. So we do all that work, and we have a feature-length documentary film that right now, I think this spring, we're having almost 70 dealership film premieres happening all around the country. So you can go to your local dealer and meet like-minded, passionate adventure riders, watch the film, get inspired, and go and plan your adventure. I think that's it. Tim, am I missing anything?
Well, just an extension of the main film. We then take that video assets and we carve them into what we call section videos, and that's where we get a little bit more granular about each section. And we put the videos up on YouTube. And say you wanted to go do section 1 and 2, and you wanted to get a real feel for what a little bit more detail around it. Those are great. They're usually a couple of minutes long, and we're in the process of doing that for Oregon right now, but have them for the other routes already done.
Right. So the film premieres, that you were talking about, is this going to be for your feature film about the Oregon BDR?
Yeah, so that's the Oregon BDR film. It's happening right now. You can go on our website, ridebdr.com, go on the events, and you'll see the listing of all the upcoming events. And I do want to mention that the film then will become free on YouTube starting May 5th. May 5th, we have our online premiere of the film, and we do a live broadcast. We have our route architects that will be the guests on the live YouTube broadcast, and then we'll basically release the film, we'll show it live, and then it'll be available for free on YouTube in perpetuity.
Yeah, and the nice thing about these film tours is they happen in the winter months. They'll start usually in the beginning of February and run through May, and it gives dealers the opportunity to host these film nights and get as many as sometimes 200 or 300 people in their dealership on a Friday night in the middle of winter. I mean, you talk about opportunity, right? So it's another way that we give back to the industry.
Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, so your organization, I mean, you're obviously providing a very valuable informational resource, as well as all the planning that you do and so forth to develop these routes. You talked about the economic impact, which is obviously very valuable to the motorcycle industry, as well as these communities that your routes go through. But it sounds like there's also this community that you've built, of like-minded, adventure dual sport riders that everybody wants to sort of, bench race and talk about their, what trips they've done and what trips they want to do. So to be able to go to a local dealership or to get just online and connect with people, I'm sure there's people that are like, hey, I want to go do the Colorado BDR this time of year. Does somebody want to join me? Because maybe they don't want to do it solo. So I'm sure that's also a great resource. So
yeah, wow. The Facebook group pages have turned into just that, a community for each route. And it's anything from getting information, real-time information about what's happening. I'm heading out next week, or, what's it look like? Anything to watch out for? Or I'm heading out in August, planning a trip in 3 months. Who's interested in coming? So it's really great. It's very much so a community building, destination, those Facebook pages.
So again, your organization has, like I said, you've got 12 routes. You've been, when was the Backcountry Discovery Routes organization started?
We were founded in 2010.
Okay, so 13 years. You do, like I said, you've got roughly a route a year. I know most of them are Western states. You've got the Mid-Atlantic is your one Eastern route. You mentioned you've got a BDRX. You've got 2 BDRX routes. Where are those located?
So, on the East Coast, we actually have 2 routes, the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast,
Okay.
and we're working on the Southeast. So at some point, the eastern part of the US will also you'll see lines all across there. And those are multi-state routes actually on the East Coast because, they're small states. But yeah, so we also have now BDRX routes, which are shorter routes that loop. You can do them anywhere between 2 to 3 days. Currently, we have 2 that have been released. One is the Red Desert BDRX in Wyoming, and another one is PA Wilds in Pennsylvania, which is kind of off of the Mid-Atlantic route. And then there's 2 BDRX routes that will be released in 2023. One is the Steens Mountain and Alvar Desert BDRX that shares the start with the Oregon route. And then another one is the Black Hills, South Dakota, that will be released in July. And that's a really great, easier ride, but very scenic and historic. So we'll be releasing that in July, actually, during the live YouTube broadcast from the Rivzilla Rally that's happening in Sturgis in July.
Wow. Okay. That's great. So I guess I'd forgotten about your Northeastern route. So that's actually an interesting thing because again, living in California, I'm actually from back east, but what we can kind of take for granted in the Western states is there's enormous tracts of public lands. And I know these routes can't probably go through national parks, but there's BLM land, there's national forest land, there's all kinds of, open space. I imagine that creates some challenges on the eastern seaboard, developing these routes. You mentioned that most of the states are smaller, so you want to connect several states in a single route, but there's a lot less public land. So how do you route through some of these areas? Like you're talking about developing the Southeast. How does that work?
Very carefully is how you do it. Very carefully. I had a major role in the development of that Northeast route. And I can tell you that it's very much more difficult than doing one in the West. We don't have BLM, right? We don't. We just flat out don't. So you wind up leveraging state forest roads, just backcountry dirt roads, country roads. A lot of in New England, there's classifications in roads. Class 4 is what we try to find, which means it's a 100% unmaintained road.
Okay.
And those are the juicy ones, right? And that's what the Northeast BDR is known for, the Class 4 roads, mostly in Vermont, some in New Hampshire, and you look for seasonal roads. So it's really more difficult. And on top of that, trying to find them is now how do we loop them all together or link them all together to make a fluid route? So that took about 2 years to develop that, more than 2 years probably to develop that route with people from each state that really knew. We got an expert for each one of those states, and there's 5 of them or 6 actually in the Northeast.
Wow.
So it was pretty crazy.
Well, I mean, again, that's, part of the informational resources that you guys offer to the riding community is that not everybody can be an expert in an area, but you guys have developed a well-known, high-profile organization that people, want to be involved with and that can share their local knowledge. I mean, again, it's not something that most people can figure out for themselves, or if they could, it would just take a long time. If you're saying it took your organization 2 years to develop the Northeast BDR, any individual would have a much more challenging time, so that you do a lot of the legwork. And when it comes to adventure riding, I know everybody's busy, everybody's got jobs, everybody's got demands on their time, is that, clearly it's not like you take the adventure out of the ride experience, but you take some of the planning out that, again, it can lead to some disappointments if you've got road closures or you've got route closures or something like that. Is people really want to focus on, hey, I want to get my bike and my gear and my equipment and what I'm going to do there. They want to focus on that. They don't really want to focus on the ride or route planning. So that takes a lot of the burden off of people.
Yeah.
So
that was my attraction to the organization. That's what caught my eye, was that, I love to adventure ride. I love this riding, but I never had the time to really put into developing routes. You work a desk job and you're doing that 40, 50, 60 hours a week, right?
Right.
Who has time to develop this? So we cater to those individuals that just don't have the time or the knowledge base to put together a fluid track.
I do want to mention, so that people understand, the volunteers who are scouting these routes, like right now we're working on the Southeast, the guys have been at work at it for probably 3 years now, and we're 2 years developing the route, and we're still trying to figure out where should it go. And they've done, numerous tens of scouting expeditions to go see where the tracks go, but it's all volunteer based. So when you meet a BDR volunteer on the trail and you say, oh, I wish I had your job. Well, no, they're spending their own time, their own money, resources to go and scout. So I want people to know that when they, donate to the BDR, it's not to pay for these people to go on extravagant scouting trips, it's all, we're 100% volunteer based, other than our staff. Our board doesn't get paid, our scouting volunteers don't get paid. So it's all kind of based on the passion that people have of sharing, the land and the resources with the community, and making it easier for people to go and have these incredible life-changing experiences. Being kind of on the receiving end of some of the emails, we get like these incredible emails. I just recently got an email from a guy he says, I'm 86, my 2 friends are 75, 78. We went and rode Mobder, and let me tell you, we had the most, memorable experience of our lifetime. So, people who live their whole life and they're so inspired by this. Or we have teams of fathers and sons and grandfathers traveling together. So that's really, I think, what keeps us going. It's not the pay, it's just this common passion to give back.
What touches me the most is when we do these film premieres and we meet the riders out there in the community, and one of the first things that they'll say to you when they walk up and they introduce themselves is thank you. They say thank you for what you've done. You create these great experiences for us, and we wouldn't know where to go if it weren't for you. And that's the biggest compliment, and when someone says, it's the only time I get to spend with my son or my daughter, we go out there and ride this route together. It's really, that's the reward for us, because it's a lot of work and with no pay. So,
well, I mean, it makes sense because you basically are breaking down barriers to enjoy this kind of recreation. I mean, we sort of take it for granted that if you're a hiker, there are things like the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, and there are these things like the Colorado River that you could go down on a rafting trip. But motorized travel on a motorcycle, again, if you're leaving the pavement, there are not that many. There are individual little routes and trails and things here or there, but to truly put together an expedition length route is enormously challenging. And you guys, again, that has been your focus, and that's what you've done. So I want to make sure that we talk about how people can support the BDR organization. I mean, again, people probably have in mind to do one of these, or they've done them. So how do they support the backcountry discovery routes?
Yeah, so we, for individual riders who maybe have ridden BDRs and were inspired by the work, or who are planning to do it and they go and download the free GPS track, I encourage you to donate, any amount that you're comfortable with. It's a tax-deductible contribution, or you can join our annual supporter program. There's 3 different levels that you can choose from. We have over 40 adventure brands in the industry that you would buy from anyways if you're outfitting yourself on your bike for the expedition. They're providing discounts and incentives. So, your contribution not only supports the BDR, but you also get something in return, and you get all these discounts from apparel and aftermarket parts. So that's really the best way to support the BDR is through our supporter program. We also, have a number of fundraising opportunities during the year, like we do our annual special edition BDR motorcycle sweepstakes. So that's a great way to, support BDR and maybe win an incredible bike. And then we also do an annual holiday auction that happens in December. It's online. And again, we have the support of the industry sponsors and donors who provide packages to the auction. And then finally, which is actually coming up, we do an annual fundraiser ride weekend. It's usually somewhere, it's a different location every year where there's great riding. So this year we're going to Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is right on the New Mexico BDR. And that event is coming up on April 20th through the 23rd. There's still room available if you wanted to come and join us, but we have daily self-guided rides, wonderful meals, we have entertainment, and then in the evening, there are presentations and roundtable discussions about the future of the BDR. So if you're available, come and join us on April 20th through the 23rd.
So Ride BDR is the website address, so people can go there and find out about how they can donate memberships, these fundraising rides. Is there a way that they can sign up for maybe emails or something where they can get regular information and updates about what's going on with the BDR organization?
Yep, at the footer of the website, you can sign up for a newsletter.
Okay. Well, like I said, I've basically have lots of riding ahead of me. I'm like a lot of other people doing several BDRs would be on my bucket list. Basically, I would put all of them on my bucket list. Having done the Oregon route, which despite some of the challenges of a like not as well maintained of a route, I look forward to doing one of yours that's been maintained. I know that each one of them is going to be unique. I mean, it's sort of like, I know Southern California versus Arizona versus Colorado versus, Wyoming versus the Northeast. Every place is going to have different kinds of terrain and vistas and places you can camp and places you can stay. So it's not like you do one and it's like, oh, it's the same. I'm sure everyone has its own unique qualities. Are there ones that you've done that there's some particular highlights or favorites you've got?
Ina, who's your favorite kid?
They're all, like you said, Greg, they're all so different. And right. I mean, I love the Southern California just for the beauty and the rural feel of it.
Yeah,
but Wyoming was great. I mean, they're all Northeast was so fun with the class 4 roads. I mean, I think Oregon is one of the more special routes as well. Very scenic. Quite technical, but you have 3 distinct kind of ecosystems that you travel through, starting in the desert, then kind of pine forests, and then you're up in the mountains where you can see, 6 volcanoes, which is such a special experience for people. So it's really hard to tell. I don't know if I would do that.
Yeah, it really is. And it also depends on what type of riding you like to do. If you don't like elevation and exposure, you might not want to do the Colorado BDR because there's lots of that. If you love sand, then the Southern California route might be the ticket. And just on that note, we're working on the Northern California route, as you mentioned earlier. And I think a lot of people get discouraged in the Southern California because of the amount of sand and the promises that there's not going to be sand on the Northern California route. So I'll just put that out there that we're gonna keep it a little harder pack.
I get it. I mean, again, if I do dual sport and adventure riding in Southern California, that almost always ends up somewhere in the Mojave Desert or something. And I have good days and bad days with sand and good moments and bad moments. And so, I imagine that's the challenge. I mean, but that's what really, for me, even though I'm not natively an off-road rider, I learned to ride on the street and I mostly ride on the street. What I really love about adventure riding, dual sport riding is it is the challenge. I mean, it really is. It's like, sometimes there are rocks, sometimes there's mud, sometimes there's, like you said, there can be sand, there can be steep terrain, there can be flat terrain, it can be wide open. I mean, but part of it for me is what makes it so special is to really get away from the city streets, the highways and so forth. You're really away from it all, and you can really kind of just escape from the daily grind and being on your computer and just being remote. I mean, there's things that people should do. I'm sure this is something that you guys advocate. People really ought to make sure that they have a way to communicate with the outside world. If you're on a remote trail, I memean, having a Garmin InReach or a Spot communicator or something like that, because you're going to be out where there's going to be no cell service. So you want to be able to, in an emergency situation, get the help that you need, travel with a buddy, ride right, all of those sorts of things where people need to practice good riding habits. And I know that that's something, Ina, that you said in the beginning is really trying to be good stewards of the land. This is a This isn't a hell-raising ride. It's a way to go out on a motorcycle and really enjoy the outdoors. So you want to maintain these trails and be respectful of anybody who may live out in these areas or in these smaller communities. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It's really an escape. It's a getaway.
Yeah, and to that point, it is really important that people ride respectfully and respect the land, because the counterbalance of us driving economic impact through these small communities, we're also driving lots of riders through these back roads, and so we feel obligated that we should be stressing the importance of riding respectfully, riding right for safety, and yielding to animals. So it's really important that those programs. The other thing I wanted to mention that you talked about the challenge is that we highly recommend, especially for the person who's new to adventure riding, is go out and get some training before you take on a BDR. The BMW Motorcycles has sponsored our last two routes, the Wyoming and the Oregon, and they sent instructors as their guest riders on those last two routes. And the Performance Center is just one of the places that you can get training, and it's a great way, and it's to get exposure to kind of the obstacles that you're gonna face out there.
Absolutely, yeah. We actually. Oh, go ahead, Ina.
And we do have a page on our website that has resources for training. There are companies that do tours on the BDR. So if if you don't feel like you want to work towards the BDR and riding it by yourself or with the group, or you're not prepared for it yet, do a BDR tour. But the resources for the trainings nationwide are also available on our website.
Right. Yeah, we just had an editor go through one of the BMW US Rider Academy courses. She did a street course there at the Performance Center in Greer, South Carolina. But they're probably best known for their off-road training, because they basically have the full line of GS models, and they've got very thorough instruction on how to deal with everything from climbs and descents and how to brake. They've got a sand pit. They've got help you. There's a lot of strategies that may be counterintuitive for street riders, but absolutely having a solid base of skills, it just allows you to enjoy the experience. I think if you're not trained and you're on, especially on a big adventure bike, it's too easy to get in over your head, and then you not only could you get hurt, but then if you're just stressed out the whole time, you're so afraid of what you don't know and what's around the next corner, that it really detracts from your experience. So getting the riding experience, riding locally, getting the training and so forth, means that once you do go on a week-long BDR experience, you're going to enjoy it that much more. You're just going to, at the end of every day, you're probably going to be absolutely exhausted, but it's that sort of like satisfaction of of accomplishment at the end of every day. So you sit around the campfire, you crack a beer, whatever it is that you do, and it's the kind of you're really building those sort of memories that last a lifetime. That's great.
100%, Greg.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Well, hey, I really appreciate being able to speak to both of you again. I know that we just met for the first time in person at the AIM Expo in Las Vegas. I was too brief of a visit. I would love to connect with you guys at one of your events sometime, but I just want to thank you for what you guys do for the community. I mean, I know, Tim, like you said, you're a volunteer board president. I know you work hard with a lot of people trying to keep this organization running, and a lot of outreach. I really encourage anybody who's listening to just support what they're doing. Go to ridebdr.com, make a donation, become a member, do something. Even if you really aren't an adventure rider, I think what you guys do for the motorcycling community is worthy of people's support. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, for having us.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. And for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews, and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.